Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War, and this time we're on to week 178, the Armistice of Brest-Litovsk. I was wondering when we would get to here. Didn't think it would be this soon. Then again, right, the whole Russian dealio really didn't last that long. It just, when you look at when you try and picture World War One, it kind of just feels like the armistice of Brest-Litovsk comes in really, really late. Well, I mean, we are at the end of 1917, so it is really, really late. Doing this series has really warped my sense of time. Hopefully we do not have any issues with the recordings this weekend. I ended up needing to get a new graphics card over the week. So it takes me an hour to drive to Micro Center. The Micro Center near me, because that's where I got my graphics card, because I got the warranty there. You know. And then, at least when I took out my card that morning, I had no issues with it. None whatsoever. I get there after driving an hour, and it takes them an hour to fiddle with my card, because they're trying to figure out something. Because it turns out it would not display for them on their little test doohickey thing. So I actually lucked out. I was just trying to see if I could game the system, but instead fate was like, no, you actually had something wrong with your card. You're a lucky son of a bitch. So I, not a religious person, but I might be now, because goddamn, that's some luck. But anyways, then I spent another hour there waiting for them to, process the swap of my old card to the new one, to the upgrade, for like the same amount of money, because that's why you get the warranty at Micro Center. And then it took me an hour to get back. So I left at like noon on I think I left on I think it was a Monday. You guys are getting a slice of life here. Left at noon on a Monday, got home at 4 o'clock. 4 hours. It was terrible. My legs, it was like my legs were killing me that day and Tuesday, the day after, because I was standing for 2 fucking hours waiting. Anyways, that's that. I just hope we don't have any problems because of the swap to a new graphics card. Things get changed with the whole, so like the monitors. The situation could be a little different. I think I've got everything correct here, set up here on my recording software. So hopefully there should be no problems. But if there are, I will cry. Let's dive in.
Russia and the Central Powers were soon going to try to negotiate a peace treaty, officially ending the war for Russia.
Woohoo.
But the German and Austro-Hungarian delegates may want different things from such a peace. And what happens when they disagree? The German army puts its foot down.
Yeah, here's the thing. At this point, like, if this had happened, if the Austro-Hungarians had, like the German generals are running the Austro-Hungarian army, as far as I am concerned at this point. Austria-Hungary, you have no control. Like, Germany is essentially sole, like, controller of this war, except for I think the Ottomans have a bit more autonomy with their generals than the Austro-Hungarians do. But I think the only front the Austro-Hungarians really have command over is the Italian front. And even that one, I'm not too sure about. Can't remember if there is a German general there calling the shots. I'm sure there probably is.
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, Jerusalem surrendered to the Allies. The Bolsheviks declared war on the Cossacks, and at home in Russia, machinations concerning recent election results began as Lenin tried to consolidate power. They were also trying to consolidate and exit from this war. This week on the 15th, an armistice was signed with the Central Powers, and it was to be in effect already from the 12th to January 14th. Here are some of its points. It had a 7-day termination notice. This would be broken by the Germans, who resumed operations with 2 days' notice. No German troops were to reinforce the Russian front during the armistice, nor were the Germans to reinforce the Western front from the Russian front. This was also broken by the Germans, since at least 7 divisions transferred west during the armistice period. Both Ottoman and Russian troops were to withdraw from Persia, and peace negotiations are to begin at once. So, on the 20th, those who were to negotiate peace arrived at Brest-Litovsk. That evening, Field Marshal Prince Leopold of Bavaria threw a huge banquet for the delegates. Immediately to his right from the head of the table was Adolf Joffe, head of the Soviet delegation, who had just been sprung from a Siberian prison, and past him, Austrian Foreign Minister Count Czernin. Joffe said to Czernin at one point that he hoped they'd raise the revolution in Austria-Hungary too. Czernin wrote in his diary that night,
That's not a thing you want to say? Like, oh, you're trying to settle for a peace here, and he's like, that's essentially a threat to people that are upholding an empire. Joffe, oh, buddy.
"We shall hardly need any assistance from the good Joffe, I fancy, in bringing revolution among ourselves. The people will manage that if the Entente persists in refusing to come to terms." But Russia was willing. Thing is, Germany could now acquire by legal treaty the territorial gains and more that they'd been unable to take in the field over the past 3.5 years. And most of the Germans involved in making a treaty had pretty much decided on a winner's peace with Russia. They certainly didn't think they should give up any land at all that German soldiers had died to take, and they damn sure wanted as many natural resources as possible for the starving masses at home to offset the British blockade. German Army Chief of Staff Paul von Hindenburg and Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff wanted Germany to annex all it could and create a border that would make any future war with Russia a lot easier, even if that meant depriving Russia from just about any access at all to the sea. They threatened a joint resignation if the German government did not agree to their demands in the treaty talks. Some top German businessmen also wanted annexations of key Russian mines and oil wells. The official head of the German delegation was Foreign Minister Richard von Kuhlmann, but the real man in charge of the mission was Max Hoffmann, who personally saw no need to give in to a people he felt had been beaten and conquered. Count Czernin did threaten to sign a separate Austrian peace with the Russians in the face of what he thought was German military arrogance. And Hoffmann responded by threatening to reassign the 25 German divisions protecting the Austrians from any renewed Russian activity to the Western Front. Lenin and Trotsky, for their part, were not against a peace on bad terms for the Russians. That was actually pretty okay with them. They knew they had to fight a civil war, and there's no way they could do that and fight a foreign war at the same time. But Lenin wanted to sign an immediate peace, while Trotsky favored stalling since he thought a Bolshevik revolution in Germany was imminent. Czernin probably wouldn't have signed any separate peace whatever the case, but others were thinking about it. See, what had initially been a real success story for the British, the Battle of Cambrai, which recently ended, was now being called by the Times one of the most ghastly stories in English history. With German troops moving west and Venice now vulnerable to Austrians, some British leaders now thought positively of separate peace with Austria-Hungary or the Ottomans. On the 18th, Jan Smuts met Austria's Count Mensdorff-Pui-Dietrichstein in Geneva.
What a name.
Mensdorff was former Austrian ambassador to London. Smuts proposed keeping the empire intact in return for a separate peace. Mensdorff said Austria could not discuss a separate peace. Same thing with the Ottomans later in Bern. They would not discuss a separate peace. Sir Horace Rumbold, who was there in both Geneva and Bern, wrote, "Our conversation with the Turks, of course, have been prejudiced by the conference at Brest-Litovsk. In the last week, we have ascertained from a number of government Turks at Geneva that conference in question has filled the Turks with extravagant hopes for the future of their empire. Not
I think what is really being exemplified here for this week of the Great War is we are seeing the strength of the Central Powers, and really this is really highlighting the weaknesses of the of the Entente. The Central Powers are when they have their successes, it is through their combined purpose. They are very united in their thought as to what their goals are largely. They all want to keep their empires, right? You have two dying empires and a new one, the German Empire. Um, and so both the Austrians and the Ottomans are entwined in the belief of we got to do what we need to do to fucking keep our empires afloat here. And Germany is really kind of their way of keeping that empire. But what we see here really is that there really doesn't seem to be much doubt within the Austro-Hungarians or the Turks of desire for a separate peace. Unlike with the Entente, where we have seen kind of quite a few times it brought up of these nations considering, or even kind of, I think considering is the best word for lack of a better word, considering separate piecing out. The Entente is not at all unified. We see that even with how they fight their battles. They are not united. The Germans and the Austrians and the Ottomans, they all are kind of working together. Now, of course, it's not always perfect. They have their issues, right? And at the start of the war, they were not. Forgot what I was saying because my dog started barking, interrupted me, and I lost my train of thought. But essentially what I'm trying to say here is, at the start of the war, we see the Central Powers having troubles with kind of being united. But once they start to be united, we see them have stronger front lines. We see them kind of start to push. Like in regards to the Russian front line, they started pushing once once really Germany started taking overall kind of command of the situation. Right? So like this armistice here is kind of highlighting this, probably what I would call the strength of the Central Alliance, and the ultimate weakness, if they do not get their shit together, of the Entente. Also why, or personally why I believe, like later on, right, once we get to World War II, at the start of the war, we have the British, kind of being the ultimate commanders. And then once the USA gets in charge, comes in, the USA kind of, after like, probably a year or two, by 1943 at the latest, the USA is pretty much overall commander of World War II. So, right, we see, like, it's kind of how wars have to be fought. You kind of need a supreme commander at the head of it all, guiding everything. Which also, I think, will land into, that's something that I think comes to perhaps hurt the Germans a little later. They don't really, right, we have that, what we remember from the beginning of this series is that the German generals tend to try and like find their own glory. We're not seeing that as much anymore, but I'm kind of curious if that is still a problem within the German military by 1917. And I remember it was a problem at the beginning, but we haven't been talking about it since the beginning. So I don't know if that issue is still there.
Only do they hope to recover Mesopotamia, Palestine, etc. with the help of the Germans, but they also expect to get portions of the Caucasus and to enter into an alliance with such a state as Georgia. In fact, they seem really to believe in the possibilities of the Turanian movement. This movement was actually more encompassing than Pan-Turkism and includes loads of peoples of Central Asia that spoke Turkic languages. Ottoman Minister of War Enver Pasha had big hopes of spreading his rule to those Turkic-speaking regions of Russian Central Asia. After the war, this war, he would lead a ragtag army into Central Asia to try and rally Turanian feeling, and was killed in 1922 in Turkestan in a skirmish against the Bolsheviks. Well, some say that he died in a cavalry charge against them, but the memoirs of the Bolshevik leader Yakov Melkumov say that Enver escaped that day and hid for 4 days until the Reds could find him, whereupon Melkumov personally killed him. But I digress. In spite of this activity, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George insisted there was no halfway house between victory and defeat, and publicly there was no hint that any diplomatic discussions were taking place. He was, however, as depressed as everyone else was by the methods of warfare in use. And
was he really? He's a fucking politician. Quite honestly, I do not believe, especially here, early 20th century politicians, we have an issue with politicians today lacking empathy. I think that was, I do not for a second believe the Prime Minister of the British Empire of the early 20th century has the empathy to be depressed about the methods of war being used here. I do not. No, I don't see
told
it.
a newspaper man of stopping the useless waste of life in a
This is pure posturing. I 100% do not fucking believe this for a fucking second. No.
attacks on the West and dealing only heavy counterstrokes while standing on the defensive. But the Russians still had plenty of fighting to do, as I said. The Bolshevik forces had occupied Rostov at the end of last week, but now they were forced to flee on the Black Sea as General Alexei Kaledin, who hadn't accepted the February Russian Revolution, let alone the October one, forced them out. Still, in spite of his issues with the provisional government between the revolutions, he clearly stated that until the provisional government was restored, his Don Cossacks would take total control of the Don region. Also this week, the Bolsheviks demanded free passage for their troops through Ukraine. The Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, denied this, and the Russian Civil War was now going to extend there. Well, it was more than just that. The Rada also did not allow the Ukrainian Soviets to hold a conference. Soviet Russia then said Ukraine either allows democracy or can consider itself at war with Russia. And here are a couple of notes to end the week. On the 18th, there was action on the Italian front as the Austrians attacked on the Monte Grappa front near Monte Assolone, taking 2,000 prisoners. The Italians would recapture the lost territory 2 days later. And Adolphe Guillaumat replaces Maurice Sarrail as commander of the Allied forces on the Salonika front. Sarrail had been unsuccessful,
A front we have not talked about in quite some time.
there in the field, and morale was terrible. He had also angered Italy, Serbia, and Greece by recognizing Esad Pasha as ruler of Albania. And his association with French politicians like Joseph Caillaux, arrested last week for treason, sealed his fate with France's new Clemenceau government. And that was the week. A Russian army
I would have liked a little bit more explanation on that whole bit there. I think they could have explained a bit more on Maurice Sarrail and the stuff going on there and the angering of the people.
armistice signed even as the Russian Civil War spreads and spreads, and some allies dreaming of a separate peace, even
Oh, I feel so bad for this man immortalized in a photo, kind of half blinking.
as Enver Pasha dreams of a vast empire. In hindsight, it's easy to blame him for that and call it totally unrealistic. But think of these guys we talk about every week. Haig, the Kaiser, Enver. They all still had dreams of not just an end to the war, but a glorious victory featuring a magnificent breakthrough. Everyone still had that arrogance, that hubris. Maybe they needed it in this war because the one guy that wasn't dreaming like that was Lenin, and he was now out of it. His dreams were now down to consolidating his country, but that would still take more war, and that would still take hundreds of thousands of lives. We are close to Christmas 1917 now, And 3 years ago, some still believed that the war might be over by Christmas 1914. And when Christmas came, and it was still war, a few soldiers decided to make peace, at least temporary peace. If you want to learn more about the 1914 Christmas...
And that was the Armistice of Brest-Litovsk. Always forget about the T. For whatever reason, I want to pronounce it as like Brest-Litovsk or whatever. That was the Great War, week 178. A thrilling week, kind of. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.